So after no action for a while, it was finally time for a return to racing on the streets of Baku, with everyone having been away from F1 for an entire month following the Australian Grand Prix. With that 4-week break, not long enough for fans to lose interest in the season, but long enough for Arsenal to bottle the Premier League title. Coming into round 4, and the Red Bulls of Verstappen and Perez led the way, followed up by Alonso. The Spaniard still close enough with a double Red Bull DNF, he could take the lead of the championship. So Valtteri Bottas, I think it's your time to shine. Further down, and after not having issues for the first time this year, McLaren were off the mark and up to 5th place, ironically exactly where Pierre Gasly was in the Australian Grand Prix before he initiated the Alpine self-destruct sequence. Hey guys, it's Taryn and welcome to the On Track channel and to round 4 in Azerbaijan. Now before we get going, as always, a quick reminder that if you do enjoy the video to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for the channel for more content this season. Now with that out of the way, let's get into my honest review of Formula 1 and the 2023 Azerbaijan Grand Prix. On to some news then, and despite a 4-week break, there was surprisingly little actually happening. If someone could tell Oscar Piastri to tweet something and cause some chaos, that would be brilliant. But we did have some controversy as the Pit Stop podcast managed to send their show plummeting, as after telling a host of racing drivers that nobody actually cared about the racing, their Spotify dropped from a 4.9 to a 2.2 in a matter of days. We've not seen a drop off that dramatic since Daniel Ricciardo moved to McLaren. And if you're in need of some F1 podcasts to fill a hole or just want some more, then check out Prixrace, talking racing and stuff. Back in the world of those who cared about the racing, and we had a brand new format for the sprint weekend with the first trial at Baku. As in this format, Friday remained the same with FP1 and then qualifying for the race on Sunday, with Saturday being a sprint exclusive with the race later on in the day and its own milli qualifying replacing the old FP2. Though it's not called sprint qualifying, instead it's called a sprint shootout. Bro, F1 are out here promoting it like it's a new feature on the F1 game. I'm half expecting each driver to be getting some form of power up like it's Mario Kart. Like, here you go Fernando, go blue shell the Red Bulls. Okay McLaren, here's a bullet bill to try and make you even semi-competitive. And then there's Ferrari, going to be given fire extinguishers for when their engine bursts into flames. But anyway, attempted jokes over, it's probably better than the useless FP2 that was there. Although now the sprint has no impact on the race, all the drivers are going to be launching their cars into turn 1 like they're Elon Musk launching a rocket into space. Into FP1, and Carlos Sainz was the first to brush against the wall, which Tsunoda took to the next level by obliterating his rear right tyre and limping back to the pits. Still, not quite as bad as things were at Alpine, as Pierre Gasly's car fancied some cooking as it started to flame and set on fire at the rear, the car smoking so much that it probably gives Snoop Dogg a run for his money. Meanwhile at Mercedes, and it was brake issues for not just Hamilton but Russell as well, though if the last 2 seasons are anything to go by, you wouldn't think they'd have problems with slowing down. Over at Ferrari, and there were a couple of issues as well for Leclerc, though at least they didn't cause him to DNF this time, as he locked up at turn 7 but managed to stop the car ploughing into the barriers. Into qualifying then, or as it should more accurately now be called, big qualifying, and first in trouble was Zhou Guanyu, pulling the handbrake at turn 1 but managing to not end up in the barriers, which was something that Nick de Vries was struggling with, as he ploughed nose first into those barriers, continuing his disappointing start to the year. And then no sooner than we'd cleared up that mess and got the red flag sorted, we had another one, as Pierre Gasly decided the best way to thank his mechanics after rebuilding his car all day was to go and destroy it, clattering the barriers at turn 3 and telling the team he couldn't slow the car down. I'm no expert, but pretty sure the brake pedal should help with that. But come the end of Q1, car wreckers Gasly and de Vries were joined by the 2 Haas cars. Into Q2, and after the world's best drivers had managed not to crash for a whole 10 minutes, we had a few people in trouble, such as Lando Norris leaving it late to set a time but making his way through along with teammate Piastri. Meanwhile, Carlos Sainz was making his way to the turn 3 runoff, failing to meet even the standards of a NASCAR driver as he was unable to turn left. Over at Mercedes, and eyes were on George Russell as he refound the form he'd shown a couple of years ago at Williams, and by that I mean sticking an absolute tractor in 11th place, meaning he was out along with the 2 actual Williams cars, Bottas and Ocon. Into Q3 then, and surprisingly we had a fight between Red Bull and Ferrari. Well, I say Ferrari, I really just mean Leclerc, given he was a whole 8 tenths ahead of Carlos Sainz, the Spaniard lagging so far behind that you'd think he was still racing in Australia. But with the final runs to go, it was Max Verstappen along with Leclerc in first and second, separated by very literally nothing, 0.000. Meanwhile, over at Aston Martin, they figured that having Lance Stroll in the car wasn't a big enough disadvantage for them, so they weren't using DRS, leaving Lance in 8th place and Fernando in 6th, with just a blank space in between them. Back to the front though, and the big winner at the end of quali was Charles Leclerc, as he improved on his final run to take pole position for Sunday's race. And if you've forgotten what a Leclerc pole really means, let me remind you. Get overtaken by the Red Bulls, fall back from the lead, have the car blow up on you. On to Saturday then, and following big quali on Friday, it was time for little quali. Kicked off by Logan Sargent deciding that he was done with sprint quali just a little early, throwing his Williams into the wall at turn 15, despite already sitting in 11th place. Later on in SQ2, and it was trouble over at Team Trash with Nico Hülkenberg locking up at turn 7, only managing to keep his car out of the barrier because he had mistaken it for a podium. Over at McLaren, and it was tight between the two drivers, with Lando finishing mini quali 2 in 10th with Piastri knocked out in 11th. This would usually be fine, except for the fact that Lando had no fresh tyres, meaning he was literally not allowed to compete in sprint quali 3. I've not seen something this strange since, well, probably the last race at the red flag restart actually. But on to the final part of what has now been 6 qualifying sessions, and it was Leclerc leading the way, with the Monegasque electing to bring out the old stick it in the wall for a red flag tactic. It didn't work, as everyone else completed their laps but couldn't improve, leaving Charles with 2 poles in one weekend and 4 total at Baku, but still yet no race win to show for it. On to the first sprint of the year then, and on the front row Leclerc and Perez got away just fine. In behind, and Max Verstappen was busy making friends with the Mercedes of George Russell, with the pair side by side through turns 1, 2 and 3, with Russell eventually coming out ahead. He did use his normal tactic though of sending it up the inside into the other car, but hey, it worked for him. Something not working however was the entirety of Yuki Tsunoda's AlphaTauri, as he broke the front wing before slamming into the wall and destroying the right rear side of his car. And normally when the car is broken you'd pull over, but he didn't do that. Okay, so maybe he'd bring it back to retire in the pits. But the team didn't do that either. Instead, they sent the car out effectively driving sideways like a crab that radioactively mutated into an F1 car, but would he pull over now? No. Instead, he went an entire lap longer, meaning we'd use up a third of the sprint behind the safety car. But when we did eventually restart, everyone got going again, except George Russell, who decided a good reaction time was overrated and was swiftly passed by Verstappen. And Verstappen wasn't the only Red Bull looking to make moves, as teammate Perez was eyeing up Leclerc, with the Mexican getting by into turn 1 and taking over the lead of the race. Now, while the Red Bull is far superior in a straight line, I've got to add here that the defence from Charles was basically non-existent. Also non-existent was action at the front for the rest of the sprint, as Sergio Perez kept increasing the gap behind to take the win, with Leclerc staying in second place, more than doubling his points tally for the season so far. On to the start, and it was clean from everyone. Well, nearly everyone, as Kevin Magnussen continued his tradition of damaging the front wing on the opening lap. Meanwhile, up at the front, and the joy for Ferrari fans lasted all of 3 laps, as Verstappen breezed by into turn 1 with the phrase "candy from a baby" being an understatement. And just 2 laps later, it was more of the same, with Sergio Perez getting by into second, though this time it wasn't taking candy from a baby, but just instead maybe from a toddler. Over at Mercedes, and with Lewis Hamilton struggling with tyres, they brought him in for a stop, which a lap later was the case for race leader Verstappen, who got the priority pit stop at Red Bull, with Max very quickly being screwed over by Nick de Vries, who elected to hit the wall and bring out the safety car, with the AlphaTauri driver electing to try and cut the corner at a turn where there's a wall for a curb. Now, I'm not suggesting that Toto has sent de Vries in to sabotage Verstappen and the Red Bull operations, but you know, though in fairness, the person it screwed over most was Lewis Hamilton, dropping him from a net 5th to net 10th. On to the restart then, and down into turn 1 it was pretty even at the front. That was until turn 3, where Ferrari's joy of Leclerc jumping Verstappen was dashed once again, with Max getting up the inside and in front, relegating Charles a position another time. And it got worse for Ferrari, as in behind, Carlos Sainz was caught out by Fernando Alonso, as the veteran sent it up the inside of turn 4, making an opportune move up into 4th place. Over at Mercedes, and after restarting 5 places apart, with Russell losing 2 and Hamilton gaining 2, the pair were side by side, with Lewis up the inside into turn 1 and squeezing his Mercedes into 7th place. At Aston Martin, and in a scene I never thought I'd see, Fernando Alonso was giving advice to his teammate Lance Stroll on brake balance, with the Canadian then immediately proceeding to run wide at turn 16, leaving him vulnerable to Hamilton. Now, I'm not suggesting that Fernando sent the message to sabotage Stroll, but you know, either way, the mistake allowed Lewis to get by using DRS down into turn 1, meaning that after being 5 places behind his teammate just a couple of laps ago, he was now 2 places ahead, with Carlos Sainz ahead of him looking to build himself a gap to the Brit behind. Unfortunately, the only gap he was building was one to his teammate, dropping back from Leclerc by like 6 or 7 tenths a lap. At this point, we all sat eagerly and waited for some more action, and waited, and waited, and still waited, with the most intriguing thing being Pierre Gasly overtaking Logan Sargent for 16th place. Though in fairness, the lack of overtaking was due in part to Ocon and Hülkenberg deciding to hold up literally half the grid, the pair starting on hard tyres and just going as far as they could, hoping for a safety car, with Lando Norris eventually sneaking by into turn 7, having spent an eternity behind the Haas. Also taking an eternity was the Alpine pit crew when it came to boxing Esteban Ocon, waiting until the very last moment on the final lap, to the point where the press were all over the pit lane as the car came in. If there was ever a time for someone to be fired over an incident, this is it. But back on track, and it was Sergio Perez holding off Verstappen to take his 2nd win of the year, with Charles Leclerc completing a well-deserved podium, holding off Alonso in 4th. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. Until next time, take care.